Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay. On July 3rd, shortly after midnight, Baghdad suffered its most devastating car bomb since the U.S. invaded in 2003. The death toll has now reached over 250, with hundreds more wounded, as a truck filled with explosives detonated in a busy part of Baghdad at the end of Holy Ramadan celebrations. The bomb exploded in a mostly Shia neighborhood, and the Islamic State, which adheres to Sunni denomination of Islam, took responsibility for the attack. This bombing took place in the wake of a series of deadly attacks that have been attributed to the ISIS in the past week, such as in Istanbul, Turkey, and in Dhaka, Bangladesh. With us to analyze what's going on in Iraq is Sabah Alnasseri. Born in Basra, Iraq, he's associate professor and director of graduate program of political science at York University in Toronto. Thanks for joining us, Sabah.
Good to be with you, Paul.
So the analysis we're hearing mostly is that ISIS has lost territory, and as a result of this are striking out in the only way it can, and that's the reasons behind the Baghdad attack and some of the other attacks. What do you make of that?
Well, Paul, the strategy of ISIS was always to control territory for time to initiate attacks on different targets in the region, especially with the conflict in Iraq and Syria are not resolved. So it was always temporary occupation of territory, not as an objective in itself. So when they lost some territorial spaces, pockets in Fallujah in Iraq, they shifted their strategies to attack other cities and provinces in Iraq. So it has always been the case. There's nothing new about these developments. And I'm not sure why everybody is surprised or why everybody believes that because ISIS lost territory, that's why they, go back to the old traditional so-called terrorist attack.
And what does ISIS hope to achieve by car bombs in Shia areas of Iraq? I mean, do they think they will make life so unlivable for people that eventually they will be allowed to have their territory without it being opposed?
So if you look at concretely at the neighborhoods, the target of ISIS in Baghdad, let's say Sadr City, or Al-Qarada, where the recent attack happens, or Hayy al-Amil, the worker neighborhood. All these neighborhoods are working class, unemployed, poor neighborhoods of Baghdad. The targets could never be the wealthy gated community in Baghdad, where the wealthy Iraqis live, where they have their private securities protecting them, or the green zone, where the ministers and the parties living their policies. And that's why you can see why when President al-Abbadi's convoy came to the scene of the bombing, people start throwing stones and attacking this convoy, blaming the government and the Iraqi state for the attack, and not so much ISIS.
Now, in terms of ISIS objectives, why would they target poor working class areas? I understand there's security in the areas of the wealthy, but mind you, there have been successful terrorist attacks even with that kind of security. I mean, if a car bomb drives into something, it blows it up. There must be a tactic here.
Okay. There are three moments that explain why this happens. First, this truck full of bombs came from Diyala, which is north of Baghdad. It went through numerous checkpoints without being detected. So why? For three reasons, and that's what I've termed systemic corruption, which the United States actually institutionalized in Iraq. The first one is the Iraqi security forces are still using this so-called, golf ball detector, sold to them by British criminals as bombs detector. The guy is in prison in the UK for 10 years for security fraud. The Iraqi soldiers at the checkpoints are still using these so-called golf ball detectors. They cannot detect anything. This is the first form of corruption. The second form is, if you look at the security apparatus in Iraq, and especially in Baghdad, you will see it is inflated as such to create employment to the parties and militias of the government.
Sabah, just before you make that point, let's go back to this golf ball thing, it's kind of a crazy story. So this guy created this supposed thing for golfers to go find their golf balls, which didn't work, didn't find golf balls. Then he sells it to the Iraqi government to find hidden explosives, which of course it didn't find those either.
True.
So is the idea in terms of corruption is there must have been some kind of payment in order to induce the Iraqis to buy something that didn't work? Because it must have been pretty obvious you could test the thing and see it didn't work.
Yes, you see, within the security apparatus, all the contract have been negotiated, dealt with behind the scene. So ministers or generals receive $1 million to secure deals that are unnecessary and useless. And this is a systemic corruption since years in Iraq. And the most bizarre thing is, even though it was clearly a fraud and the guy who was in prison in the UK, still the poor Iraqi soldier at this checkpoint are still using these detectors because one of the officers was arguing, well, at least they have something to do. So that means they didn't take even the security of the people in these poor neighborhoods seriously because of this class chauvinist attitude.
Okay, so is the objective then of ISIS to get people in the poor Sunni working class areas to turn on the government?
To exploit the ressentiment among the Iraqi population vis-a-vis the government and their states and turn it against them instead of against ISIS or other forces within Iraq. And I think that this is very strong appeal because, as you can see, when Abadi's convoy visited the scene,
Abadi meaning the prime minister, current prime minister of Iraq. Yeah.
Exactly. People, accused him of corruption, and he is the reason why his government, why they are attacked, not so much ISIS. And again, this is the first moment of corruption. The second moment is, as I was talking about, this inflated security apparatus is nothing but an employment, a venue for all the militias and supporters of the governing parties. And most of them, they buy and sell their security posts. So nominally they are on paper, but de facto none of them is in charge or taking care of the security of the people. And the third moment, which is so dramatic, that the Interior Minister Al-Ghabban resigned yesterday because he was complaining that there are overlapping jurisdiction within the security apparatus. That means in Baghdad, you have the army, the federal police, and the local police, and the latter is under the jurisdiction of the interior ministries. And all these, they have different reporting systems to counter-insurgency agencies or counter-terrorism agencies or regional security commands or the defense ministries. So there is no coordinated chain of command, coordinated intelligence and reporting system that makes it clear to the interior minister who's doing what in what place. It creates an organized chaos that is one of the reasons why ISIL can operate so easily within Baghdad or other parts of Iraq and attack the poor neighborhood that they are not secured and left open de facto to be attacked by ISIS or any other extremist group.
So in terms of U.S. policy, if defense against terrorism and the talk of terrorist attacks coming increasingly to the United States and so on, which they haven't nearly as much as one thought they might have, what is U.S. policy actually achieving there?
Well, Paul, I argued a long time ago on the Real News that the policy is to create this, what they have termed the creative chaos. The policy is to control instability in the region. So much, I'll give you an example, why things are shifting and why the U.S. is losing more and more control within the Middle East. You see, especially after the attack on Libya and the destruction of the Libyan state and so on. After that, Russia and China decided there will be no other military intervention in the Middle East because that would mean, the end of the presence of especially Russia and behind the scenes China in the Middle East. They start coordinating their strategy diplomatically, politically, and militarily in the Middle East to push back against U.S. and NATO intervention in the Middle East. Why they are doing this? Because Russia realized NATO is expanding eastward, especially through Ukraine, and China realized that the U.S. expanding quite this Pacific strategy to contain China and Russia. So what they're trying to do is to hit back at the center of the U.S. influence zone in the world, which is the Middle East. That's why the Middle East became, if you would like, the hub, the melting point of the rivalries of global power maybe since the 1991 after the breakdown of the Soviet Union. It is a very dangerous development, and many people in the Middle East are saying we're already in the Third World War and we don't notice it. So the whole foreign policy of the Middle East, of the U.S. after 1991 is to control the region qua instability by creating chaos, is now hitting back against the U.S. and it's losing control of the Middle East. And the most dangerous thing about it, as you know, the more they lose control, the more militarized became the conflict and the more dangerous it becomes.
Well, I wonder if this losing of control is actually more part of controlled chaos, in the sense that, like, who's managing U.S. foreign policy? To a large extent, these are people that were opposed to the U.S. invasion of Iraq. So they weren't, they're dealing with a situation created by the Bush administration and people that wouldn't listen to the professionals, because as we know now, almost the entire professional intelligence and military apparatus was against the invasion of Iraq.
Yes.
Now they're dealing with the consequences of that, and maybe the objective is they see there's kind of an upside in this craziness. As long as everybody's killing each other.
Yes.
And there's, arms sales.
Yes.
No power can really vie for to contend. There's no.
Right.
The states are they're fueling the rivalry, even the Saudi-Iranian rivalry, which obviously each side has its own agenda there, as each trying to assert its power. But it's very much in American interest to keep that rivalry going. This maybe the controlled chaos is still working for them, and the truth is that's far more in their interest than worrying about the odd terrorist attack that might come to the United States. Because frankly, it ain't like in Baghdad, it ain't likely the wealthy that are going to wind up getting hit.
Yeah, I agree with you.
World Trade Tower's exempt from that. But the more recent attacks have been, ordinary people in the streets.
Right, I agree with you. And I want to give you an example, because sometimes, for all these so-called terror attack and sectarianism and so on, we don't see what is really taking place on the ground. I'll give you just a clear example to confirm what we were saying. If you look at, for instance, the involvement of the United Arab Emirates and the conflict in Yemen. Now, everybody was thinking that the Emiratis and the Saudis are attacking the Houthis because the Houthis are supported by Iran. Now, if you look at concretely what the United Arab Emirates did in Yemen, you will see, first of all, they fought with mercenaries from Colombia. So they internationalized the security apparatus. So you have Colombian mercenaries fighting for the United Arab Emirates in Yemen. But what for are they fighting for? The United Arab Emirates fear that if there's a conflict between the U.S. and Iran will close the Hormuz Strait. And that's the only port the United Arab Emirates has for export-import. So when they went to Yemen, they wanted to occupy the Aden port in Yemen and invest there and keep it as a backup port for the United Arab Emirates for its export and import, just in case if there's a conflict in the Gulf. So when they withdrew their soldiers a few weeks ago saying mission accomplished, this is precisely what they had in mind, to occupy the Aden port and invest hugely there to make it de facto a United Arab port in Yemen. So if we look at concretely in a political economic sense, we will see underneath this sectarianism and the talk of war on terror, there are concrete material economic security interests of regional and international players. And you're right, it's not only the US, it's the Saudis, the Emiratis, it's the Iranian, and so on.
But all kind of within the American umbrella.
Until now, yes. But the problem is, I think there are a lot of holes in the American umbrella.
All right, thanks very much for joining us, Sabah. We'll continue this conversation, I hope, as soon as next week.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.